This is the second video on vision, our special senses. The first video, recall, we were looking at wavelengths of light, which allows light, the colors, to be separated. We also talked about how things in our world have color as a result of pigments. Objects around us, they have pigments. Pigments absorb light. So if an object happens to be, say, red, it has pigments that absorb every color in the rainbow except red. Red light then is reflected off of that object. The light, red, travels into our eye, bouncing off of it, and then we perceive that thing as having a 3D shape as well as having a color, in this scenario, red. In this one, we're going to move a little bit further. We're going to start looking at the vascular layer. Vascular obviously has a blood supply, otherwise it wouldn't be called vascular. But it also does a couple things. It controls the shape of the iris, and it controls the amount of light entering the eye. So we're going to talk about these three functions in further detail as we move forward. The vascular layer has a couple parts to it. We'll talk about each of these as well. So here's just a list: the choroid, the ciliary body, the iris, and the pupil. We're going to start by looking at the choroid. But before we can understand the choroid, we have to kind of revisit the wavelengths of light. We also have to revisit pigments. Once again, if an object has a pigment for a specific wavelength of light, that wavelength of light will be absorbed into that object. And if an object does not have a pigment for light, that wavelength of light will be reflected off of whatever object we happen to be looking at. So when we start talking about the choroid, pigments they become a big deal. Let's talk about things called the color black and things called the color white. You may have heard previously that black is not a color. And here's why black can be considered to not have a color. Something that is black, like this part of the screen, it contains every pigment to absorb every wavelength of light. So if this spot on my screen is black, it has every pigment to absorb all of the light coming down from the sun. And if it absorbs all of that light, then technically no light is being reflected off of this part of the screen. And if no light is being reflected off of that part of the screen, how can light from this spot go into my eye? Hence, we start to understand why black is considered to be not a color, because colors have to come from light, and this is having no light bounce off of this and go into my eye. So black is considered to be not a color. White, on the other hand, is something that has no pigment whatsoever. So all of the colors from sunlight, they hit this spot on my screen. Nothing's absorbed. Everything's reflected. So white is considered to be a kind of collection of every single color of light. You could say that white is a color because it's reflecting all the colors, and you could say black is no color because it's reflecting no colors. This kind of leads into articles of clothing that you might want to wear outside on a sunny day, especially here in Phoenix. If you're wearing black t-shirts and you're outside for an extended period of time, it's absorbing all of the energy from the sunlight, which is going to warm your body up a little bit more so than if you were, say, wearing white, where it's not absorbing the energy from the sun and it's all being reflected off of it. Now, does that really make a huge difference when you're outside on the roof laying shingles in 120-degree heat? Probably not so much, but you kind of get the point. Now, we previously learned about the word melanin. We learned that it's in our skin. We learned that there's a form of melanin in our hair, a couple different forms actually. And we know that melanin contributes to the color of something. When you go to dissect the eye, you're going to see in it a very, very black layer of film. I don't know that I've actually seen anything blacker than the choroid. What this means is that the choroid has a lot of melanin. Now we have to start learning about why there is something that's so black inside of our eye. Well, first off, you're going to see the choroid when you open up the eye. It's going to be jet black. But on the back of the eye back here, you're going to see kind of a gasoline-colored thing. That gasoline-colored thing is the retina. And the retina is what we want light to go to in our eye. So as light goes through the cornea, it will then pass through the pupil and through the lens. And we learned about the lens previously as kind of being a magnifying glass. You can definitely start fires with it. I used to take a magnifying glass and angle it correctly so that it would start leaves on fire. Definitely can start fires that way. But how is that working? Well, we have to understand in order for light to do that, we have to concentrate the light. So we don't want light going through the lens and just going straight back. We would take it from the top, it would go straight back, from the middle, straight back, from the bottom, it would go straight back. That's going to kind of cause haziness and fuzziness in our vision. We want all of the light to go to one spot on the back of our eye. The next picture here kind of illustrates where that spot is. It's called the fovea centralis. We can kind of see it's a little pit right around in here on our screen. That's really where we want the light from the lens to go. So the lens, it takes the light from the top part of the eye that goes in, and it directs it down to the fovea. From the bottom part, it directs it up to the fovea. From the middle part, it directs it to the fovea. And when we have all the light from the top, middle, and bottom kind of converging in one spot, that gives us perfect vision. Now, when there's problems with the lens, that kind of leads to the necessity of wearing glasses. So let's get back to the choroid. As we know, many people, they do have to wear corrective lenses. The reason for that is there's a problem with something going on up here in the eye, or maybe back here with the shape of the eyeball. As a result of one problem or the other, sometimes light will go through the lens and it won't make it back to the retina or fovea centralis. Light will go through the lens and it might go up here or down here or to the side wall. Now, because this part of the eye is jet black where the choroid is located, that light would be absorbed in. Once again, because black has all the pigments, it would absorb that light. How would this be different functionally if the choroid was not black? What if the choroid was, say, white? Well, the light would go through the lens, hit this spot, and then the light would be reflected off. So the light would literally just start bouncing around the inside of our eyeball. Essentially, our eyeball on the inside would become a mirror, so to speak. And if you can only imagine the headaches you would get from that, you can kind of appreciate why the choroid just happens to be so jet black. We also know that the vascular has blood vessels. We can kind of see those in this image. We can kind of see them going through the eye. They tend to be behind the choroid, so when you peel back the choroid, that's when you would maybe start to see some of those blood vessels once we get to our dissection. The ciliary body is another component of the vascular layer. It is a collection of two things, the ciliary muscle and the suspensory ligaments. These kind of come into play when we squint. Let's first talk about where they're located. We have our lens here. Our suspensory ligaments are represented by this kind of white triangle thing. They attach to the lens, and the muscle attaches to the ligaments. We know that muscles are able of contracting. The suspensory ligaments, they kind of surround the lens, as does the ciliary muscle. When we go to squint, we do that for the reason of ultimately seeing better. So we need to try to change the shape of this lens to get light going back to the fovea centralis. Maybe light's hitting the retina, but it's hitting it in various places, which is kind of giving us hazy vision, so we're trying to get it all going to the fovea. So in order to do that, we squint, which is really a contraction of the ciliary muscle. And when this muscle contracts, it tugs on the suspensory ligament, which, as you know, is attached to the lens. Because this is pulling on the lens will change shape. We want to change the shape of the lens in the position where it's angling the light to the fovea, where we can concentrate that light and ultimately give us the ability to see better. So whenever we say the term ciliary body, we really are thinking of a collection of these two things for the purpose of adjusting our lens so that we can see better. The last components of the vasculae we're going to look at are the iris and the pupil. The iris is the colored part of our eye. The pupil is a dark hole. As I mentioned previously, it is a hole. There is literally nothing there. It is a hole. The hole can get larger or smaller, and it does that depending on the light intensity of your environment. We spoke about this kind of happening with the fight or flight response, and as the hole gets bigger, it allows more light to get in. And when we're in a dire situation, we want more light getting in so that we can process really everything that's kind of going on around us. The pupil, generally speaking, when we're at rest, is going to be small if we're in a bright situation. So if you're outside, because we don't need a lot of light going in. So the hole gets smaller so that we aren't overcome by the amount of light that happens to be going into our eye. But when you move into a more dimly set situation, the hole actually becomes bigger to allow more light to come in as a result of the loss of light from the surroundings that you happen to be in. Now, the hole isn't really kind of changing size. What's really changing size is the iris. The iris is the colored part of your eye, and when you go to look at it, it's going to have a bunch of lines on it, and you might liken it to an accordion. An accordion is an instrument that can be collapsed or it can expand, kind of like our chest when we breathe. So when our iris contracts, the iris actually opens up, and that allows the pupil to become bigger as a result of the thickness of the iris actually shrinking. When we move into a darker situation, though, the iris relaxes, it expands or becomes thicker, and as a result of this becoming bigger, the pupil would get smaller. So these two work together to accommodate the amount of light that goes into our eyes. It functions in dimly lit or brightly lit situations, kind of depending, but it also works in conjunction with our fight or flight response as well. The last part of this video, we're going to be looking at the nervous layer, starting with the retina. The retina, it is a kind of a gasoline-colored part. It's the back wall of our eye. This is where we want light to go so that we can take that light and convert it into an image. This image, we see a dark pit right here. That is the fovea centralis. That is where we want light to go. And we can see an opening over here where blood vessels and nerves kind of pass through. Both are located on the retina. In our retina, we have two types of photoreceptors. We have rods and cones. They are called that because of their shape. Here we see a cone. It's located in the retina. We're looking at the back wall of our eye. Cones, they are kind of cone-shaped, where rods are kind of more cylindrical-shaped. And just based on this image, it does a decent job illustrating that the number of rods far outweigh the number of cones that happen to be located in the retina. They do different things. Rods, they're used for black and white vision, and they are our primary sense of detection when we are in dimly lit settings, because there's not a lot of light, and if there's not a lot of light, there's not going to be a lot of color, so we tend to use rods. Cones, on the other hand, those are used for detecting color. There's three types of cones: S cones, M cones, and L cones. They detect different colors. So we can see that different types of cones will detect different types of colors. And should a person have issues with one type of cone or all three, that does lead to different problems resulting in color blindness. When this video concludes, I'm going to direct you to go check out these two videos, which will also be in your Edpuzzle. Start with the color blindness one first before moving into the one where you can actually test yourself to see if you are colorblind. After you check out those two videos, we will then start looking more so at the remaining components of the eye, going back to the nervous layer, the optic nerve, blind spot, so on and so forth. This concludes this video. Go check out those videos on color blindness.